The Fuel Sports Network.
Behold the King of Kings.
We couldn't do diddly poo.
I'm dropping the hammer.
No, you're not.
And that's the bottom line.
Here, have a quarter, make a phone call.
I have wrestled with an alligator.
What?
I done tussled with a whale.
What?
I done handcuffed lightning, throw thunder in jail.
Funky butt loving.
Did you say funky butt loving?
There's no crying. There's no crying in baseball.
Let the big dog eat.
Woo! Whoa! Woo! Whoa! Woo! 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 It's time!
Welcome, one and all. Derek King Show, Wednesdays, 9 a.m., Fuel Sports Network. As always, I have to have my reading spectacles on, whenever I read small print, catching up on all the deadline news that's been going on here over the last 24 to 48 hours in Major League Baseball. We're going to touch on that. We're also going to touch on, I finally had sat down, and I know this is crazy, and I watched the American Underdog movie related to kind of the Kurt Warner story, St. Louis Rams at the time. And as everyone knows, obviously, over said shoulder, you could see a Kurt Warner St. Louis Rams jersey there. I'm a Warner homer, always have been, always will be. So, is something I'm going to touch on a little bit later. But as of always, this is a Derek King Show on the Fuel Sports Network. Make sure you go over to www.fuelsportsnetwork.com. Check out all the great articles. Check all the great stuff over there on the website. Make sure that if you're on Facebook, thank you. Awesome. Make sure you add the group page too, Fuel Sports Network group page. And like all of the other social pages on Instagram and Twitter and so on and so forth. Let's get into it. One of the things that I want to talk about is these trade deadline moves and what has occurred. And obviously, the spectacles have to go back on in order to read anything because, I'm getting old. It's always the eyes that go, knees, eyes, things like that. So, I want to start off with someone that is familiar to most St. Louis Cardinal baseball fans, is the name Jack Flaherty. I remember just prior to the deadline seeing a few articles that were kind of sort of linking the Cardinals to a Jack Flaherty reunion. I didn't really see how that made any sense. And clearly that has changed things because Jack Flaherty did not come to the Cardinals. They did not make a move for the former St. Louis Cardinal ace and right-handed hurler. They ended up moving him from the Tigers to what a shock, what a surprise, the Los Angeles Dodgers, exactly where Jack Flaherty wants to be and has always wanted to go. Now, there were a couple of people that were moved in that trade, but, obviously he goes to a loaded Los Angeles Dodgers rotation. I really thought that the Dodgers wouldn't make a move for a guy like Flaherty because of where he fell at rotationally, considering who they have. That really surprised me. Detroit did get the Dodgers number 8 prospect, Liriano, I believe is his last name. But Buehler's out, Yamamoto's out. They needed some pitching. They also got the number 22 prospect from the Dodgers to Detroit in Sweeney. So, just looking at that particular trade, I would give that kind of like a C plus, B minus for the Dodgers. and for the Tigers being in rebuild mode and doing what they're doing, I'm not really surprised by that move. Moving on, Padres made a couple of moves with the Marlins, moved some, a couple of people around, some all-stars, and just, a lot of pitching. A lot of pitching moved at the deadline. One of the big ones was that the Cleveland Guardians have acquired the pitcher Alex Cobb from the San Francisco Giants for left-handed pitcher Jacob Buchanan and a player to be named. Now, I like this move for both teams. Guardians get, I believe, a fairly solid pitcher, upper end of the rotation kind of guy, and Alex Cobb, decent with the ERA. And that's good for both teams on this move. The Giants get a left-handed pitcher in Buchanan, who's going to help them eventually later on down the road. He was top 30s prospect within the Cleveland Guardians organization. So that's good for them. The Reds made a couple of minor moves. Nothing's really be talked about. The Yankees made a couple of minor moves, same thing as well. But the ones that I really kind of want to get into is the ones that obviously the Cardinals have made. The Dodgers made even more moves than the pitcher stuff, and we'll get into that with the Kevin Kiermaier move. But the Cardinals decided in their infinite wisdom, hey, we might need some pitching. That's what they did. And whenever you're in a situation where the Cardinals are at, and you have a flood of outfielders, you have extra infielders, there's a lot of people that, need to be moved because you don't have space for them. You don't have some place to be able to put those particular players. So you got to ask yourself, well, then what are we doing? Well, why do we have this backlog of 5 outfielders we don't have playing time for? We've got infielders that are backlogged and things that are going on. We need to make moves. We need pitching. We need starting pitching. We need, relief pitching. Okay, we got a couple of decent relievers, but we don't really have what we need in order to succeed going further and make potentially a playoff run. They needed to make some moves there in that department. So they've started in that direction. And the one surprising one, well, it's not surprising that the White Sox are selling off. Not really surprised terribly by that. The one that surprises me is the return of Tommy Pham to the Cardinals. I have some thoughts on this. I used to really like Pham, and I still do. The issue that I have with the move is that now he's at the back end of his career. What are we doing? Is it because you're planning on having him as a platoon guy? Because you're going to go forward with your 3 set outfielders now? Because they moved Dylan Carlson. He's gone. He's been traded. So what are you looking at? So they moved Tommy Edman and reliever Michael Kopech. And they get Eric Fetty, and outfielder Tommy Pham. There's also some other prospects that are moving because this was a 3-team trade. So the Dodgers got Edman, Kopech, and a right-handed reliever by the name of Oliver Gonzalez. The Cardinals received Eric Fetty, outfielder Tommy Pham, and a player to be named from the Dodgers. As of now, I have not heard who that player is. The White Sox are going to get outfielder Miguel Vargas, second baseman Haral Perez, infielder Alexander Albertus, and a player to be named from the Dodgers as well. So clearly the Dodgers get an A on this because they moved a lot of dead weight. They moved a lot of, different things, and they still kept their core together. The Cardinals, I'm going to give them a B plus on this move. Clearly needed some pitching, needed to move Edman because Edman was really clogging up the pipeline. You have your second baseman in Brendan Donovan. Your infield is set. You have Arenado at third. You have Goldschmidt at first. And obviously behind Goldschmidt, you've got a couple of options. We still have Jordan Walker that's out there. There are players that can be moved for the Cardinals. I give them a BB plus on this one. The Cardinals really needed pitching. The White Sox just stunk it up on this one. They moved players they didn't have to move. They did things they didn't have to do. Maybe there's a bigger plan about what's going on here, but I don't know what that might be. It's really hard to say. Dylan Carlson was moved to the Tampa Bay Rays for a right-handed reliever in Sean Armstrong. Now, what Armstrong is going to be able to bring to the organization kind of remains to be seen. We'll see what ends up happening from that. But, Carlson was not working in St. Louis. And I watched Carlson all throughout his younger portion of his career, coming up in through the Springfield organization and heading into Memphis. There just really wasn't room for him because of his performance at this point. So we had to make some kind of a move within the Cardinals organization in order to open up the pipeline for all these players. You only have so much space. Part of it is predicated on payroll. Part of it is predicated on space and playing time. You just only have so many options. And there's only so much that you could do. So for this deadline, I would give the Cardinals a B. They made the moves they needed to make. They did what they needed to do. I'm happy with that. As far as the deadline is concerned, I still feel like there was a couple of moves that could have been made. Maybe they were still talking within those realms of making those moves. I know that the Cardinals were probably trying for a different pitcher than Eric Fede. That's what it ended up being. But, sometimes these moves don't work out. When you have GMs and they're in a negotiation, they're going to call up another GM. They're going to say, hey, I'm wanting to move this player or this package or whatever. What do you have? You're going to go back and forth with whatever they want to give you. It's the same thing with buying a house or negotiating to buy a car. It's the same philosophy. It's no different. You're moving players and on rosters, and you're moving contracts, and you're moving money. Andrew says, and he makes a really good point, that Carlson will figure it out down there in Tampa. Well, Andrew, I would definitely agree with you on that. And I would even go as far as saying that a lot of the problems with a majority of the Cardinals players, we saw it with Adolis Garcia, right? We saw it with Sandy Alcantara. We've seen it with, who is the other Cardinal outfielder that was moved? It'll come to me. Luke Voigt, who, had some success with the Yankees and has moved on to other territories. I don't know if he's still with the Padres or if they've moved him. At this point, I just have not followed it all that closely. But sometimes these players just need to be moved. They need a fresh start. They need different coaching, fresh coaching. They need different things. We are, continuing to watch some of these players and their development within the organization, within the Cardinals organization. We're obviously hoping that certain particular players pan out. Obviously, Jordan Walker is at the top of that list. He's been one of those type of players to where the hope is so high. The ceiling, so to speak, is so high. Randy A. There you go. That's who it was. Thanks, Andrew. Appreciate that. I don't know why Randy always escapes me. I don't know why. It just does. But anyway, the organization, as far as the Cardinals are concerned, they're in that kind of number 10 to 20. They're in that block of teams in Major League Baseball that, yeah, you can compete, but it's going to be, all the stars are going to have to align. Everything's going to have to be absolutely perfect alignment. Everything's going to have to be right where you need it to be in order to have that success going forward in the playoffs, potentially, hopefully. But then, the top 10 teams within that scale, specifically the top 7 teams, they really don't have to make a whole lot of moves. They don't really have to change a whole ton. They just have to keep doing what they're doing, and they're going to have success. So overall, not really a super exciting trade deadline. There wasn't no huge names that were moved. There wasn't no super duper stars that were moved. I remember back in the 90s, there were some pretty heavy hitters that were moved in baseball. Some pretty big contracts that were moved around. I could remember players being traded, pitchers, hitters, things of that nature. And you would just think, oh my gosh, I never would have imagined that particular player would have been moved. Again, I go to McGuire because I'm a McGuire mark. I'm a McGuire fan. And I look at him and go, oh my gosh, wow. What a move. What a coup for the Cardinals to be able to land somebody like McGuire. And then obviously for him to finish the rest of the remainder of his career within the organization. Forget all the other stuff, but it's just at the time he was one of the premier hitters in major leagues. He's there with Ken Griffey, he's there with Sammy Sosa, he was there with Rafael Palmeiro and Barry Bonds, and the list goes on and on and on. There was a lot of really, really amazing hitters in that time frame. And a lot of them just got traded, bounced around, moved. I remember when the Yankees picked up Jose Canseco from the Rays just purely out of spite. I think it was the Rays or it was the Blue Jays at the time. I can't remember who he's playing for. I'd have to look back at Baseball Reference and look at the moves that were made. But I remember they picked him up from a particular team so that way another team wouldn't get him, but they wouldn't have to play against him in a potential playoff scenario. That's, again, it's the finicky side of baseball, the picky side of baseball. I've seen it done in football too. And so it's always funny to look back on some of these moves, whether they be pitchers or hitters or whatever, to see, oh, well, they were just out to keep that player away from going over to here because they heard that their rival within their division who they're running a tight race against, and there's only like 2.5 games separating them. They were in the market for that pitcher or that hitter, and they were talking, moves, but then they swooped in last minute and picked them up. It happens all the time. All these GMs talk, all these GMs have conversations. You'll have a GM that will call one GM up and say, hey, listen, I've got so-and-so as a pitcher. I'm getting ready to put him on the board. I've got 2 or 3 teams interested. One of them you're not going to like. They don't have to name names, but they could just say, listen, you're going to want to get this guy because if he goes out and I've got an active verbal from another GM that I'll trade you my, top 2 prospects for this all-star, for this, hitter, for this pitcher, you better be making a move pretty quick because if you don't, then you're going to get left behind. Andrew, again, he's making some really great points. Carson Walker were the last two players that had so much hype that they moved him up since Oscar Taveras. Oscar Taveras, that's a really big point. When he unfortunately had his accident and passed away, that really threw the entire organization into chaos. Absolute chaos. They were pinning everything on Oscar Taveras. That, again, that's why they let Albert Pujols walk, and there was a lot of other different, mechanics that were in play there. Man, he was a talent. Whew. Saw that guy play all, coming up all throughout he was such a talented player, and it's a shame that we don't ever get to experience that. It's an even bigger shame he lost his life, but that we don't get to experience that as fans is an even more devastating thing in a lot of aspects. We were unfortunately robbed of that as much as he was robbed of his life, and it's unfortunate and it's sad. There's a lot of players that you see at the height of their careers that have had accidents, have had injuries. And they never were the same. I always go back to Bo Jackson. We talk about, a player that was so tremendous that could play any sport he wanted to because he was so athletic. I remember early on in his career when he was playing with the Kansas City Royals. Obviously, whenever he was a running back for the Oakland Raiders, the Los Angeles Raiders at the time. After that devastating knee injury or hip injury that he had, not knee injury, but hip injury that he had, it was just never the same. He played baseball for a few more years after that, obviously a low contact sport, but still a contact sport nevertheless. It's always interesting to me now that, again, going back to what we said before about players being moved, specific players being moved at the trade deadline that you used to see, you don't see that anymore. Those players and those contracts aren't being moved. And a lot of it has to do with the latter of what I just said, the contracts, the legal mumbo jumbo, the jargon that's in these contracts, and a lot of them that cannot be moved because they have either no trade clauses or they have certain particular teams that are on a no trade list. And obviously certain caveats that are within those contracts to say, hey, if I'm traded to one of these 20 teams that I've designated that I would accept the trade to, my contract carries over in full. And so you have to move that contract. Sometimes it's a monetary issue due to the fact that some teams are either so close to the payroll tax threshold, because, again, we don't have a salary cap in Major League Baseball. That's very complicated for a lot of teams, especially mid-small market teams like the Cardinals or the Rays or not necessarily the White Sox, but you have two teams gobbling up that market. It kind of pushes them to a mid-market, even though Chicago's so big, the number 3 market now at this point in the nation. You have New York, you have New York, LA, then Chicago. So yeah, I mean that's some pretty big markets, and but for the smaller market, mid-market teams, they can't compete with that. There's no way that they can be at that threshold that the Boston Red Sox are at, or that the Yankees would be at, or the Dodgers would be at. The Cubs can compete. The White Sox obviously have been on a downturn since the Leland years. Well, no, I'm thinking of Detroit, not the Leland years, since the Ozzie Guillen years when they had success. And I was actually just reading an article on Jim Leland here the other day when he was an advanced scout for the St. Louis Cardinals prior to him coming back out of retirement for when he used to manage the Pittsburgh Pirates. And he was willing to come back out of retirement to manage the Pirates at the time, but the Pirates rebuffed him to a certain extent, and he literally got in his car, drove to Detroit, took the job. They went to World Series, went to playoff appearances, had really great success. It's funny how those things work out. Looking at the Cardinals organization since the departure of La Russa, and La Russa coming back out of retirement to then managed the White Sox, which did not pan out, did not work out. His health, the day and age that we live in, the type of player mentality, that type of managing just doesn't fit anymore. It may have worked in the 80s and the 90s, even into the early 2000s. It does not work that way anymore with these players. It's a lot of the same philosophy in basketball. They don't have the same mentality anymore because the players, the approach is completely and utterly different. We cannot expect the same coaching philosophies to work anymore. There are a handful of coaches, and this leads me into my thing with the Underdog movie, American Underdog or whatever it was called, with the Kurt Warner story. Dick Vermeil, when he was brought in to Philadelphia, prior to that, he was a coach with the Los Angeles Rams. He was actually, I believe, an offensive coordinator, if I'm not mistaken. He might have been DC. I can't remember exactly. This was back in the late 70s, 80s, or actually it was the early 70s. And I think prior to that, I think he was at UCLA, something around one of those lines. I, again, don't know, just guess it off the top of my head from what I recall from memory. But he had some prior experience. But Dick Vermeil was a different kind of cat. Go back and look at some of his pressers. Crying, very emotional guy. His players loved him. That's why he had success. That's why he had success in Philadelphia. That's why he had success in St. Louis. That's why he had success in Kansas City during those time frames. Dick Vermeil was a player's coach. Sometimes that works. A lot of times that works because the mentality of the player has changed. Because instead of what it used to be years ago, where players were just excited about being on a baseball field or being on a football field and producing and performing and, being able to earn a living doing what they enjoy and what they're good at and what they love. Now it's a business model. And they have to protect that business model. They have to protect the idea of what it is that they're trying to do. My glasses are on crooked, I swear. But it's one of those things to where in the future, going forward, you're going to start seeing more and more of these type of coaches. I think you're seeing the end of the advanced analytics side of things because I think that they've jumped the shark. Especially in baseball, they've jumped the shark as far as how far they've gone down that rabbit hole. I think there are aspects of it and that work. I'm a big proponent in baseball with, rotational mass, loading up, getting the bat level as you go down through the zone and making sure that you keep the bat through the zone for as long a period as you can as a batter. Obviously as a pitcher, it used to be, I remember whenever I was younger, it was all about the heat, right? It was all about the velocity. How fast can you throw? Now I'm more of, hey, it needs to be more like Greg Maddux. You need to have movement. That ball needs to dance around all over the place. You need to be able to cut through the zone one direction and to be able to backdoor it the other way if you can. A lot of times in the real world, it is very difficult if you're throwing a two-seam fastball to get it to cut inside, backdoor to a right-handed hitter. Whatever dominant hand, and this is my right because it's obvious, it's opposite to you guys, but to a right-handed pitcher, if I'm throwing a 12-6 curveball, you expect it to fall off the table. If I'm throwing a slurve, it's more of a cut, three-quarter cut. But if I'm throwing a slider, you expect it to cut at almost this angle, kind of this way. Not straight across, but at a kind of downward slope at the opposite angle. But if the ball has been manipulated, scuffed, even doctored, whatever you want to call it, you can have that backdoor cut. So instead of coming in and kind of falling off where most fastballs would do, a lot of tendency they'll say, well, a rising fastball. That's a misnomer. There's no such thing as a rising fastball. It doesn't work that way. It's just a fastball that doesn't fall off as much by the time it gets to the plate. It stays a little bit straighter because the anticipation as a hitter being in the box, there are some pitchers that as they're coming, they'll have either a 3/4 motion, they'll have a sidearm motion. There are very rare submariners that will come in and have those type of motions. But a lot of times it's more of an orthodox, over at a 3/4 or straight over, especially if you have a curveball pitcher like an Adam Wainwright. But most of them are coming at a 3/4 movement. And if you ever saw Adam Wainwright pitch, either from the stretch or some other form, you knew what he was throwing before he ever threw it. And that's why later on in his career, he developed that hard cutter. That's a lot of the reasons as to why. So we have ran our time, unfortunately, today. And I would love to stay on for another 30 minutes, but got to stay with the scheduling. So thank you guys. Appreciate you coming in on a Wednesday at 9 a.m. We had a really good turnout today. Glad to see you guys. I'll see you back here next week, or I'll see you on a special edition show. You just never know what's going to end up popping up. Make sure you go over to Fuel Sports Network. Check out all the socials, Facebook, X, Instagram, YouTube. Make sure you add it on there too as well. I know Andrew's over there. So I'll talk to you guys later. Thank you so much. See you soon. And just be safe. Have fun out there. Talk to you guys later. Take it.